You. Good evening, everyone. So nice to see you. Happy New Year to everyone. I'd like to call our regular meeting of the Town Plan and Zoning Commission to order. Today is Tuesday, January 3rd, 2023 at 6:35 p.m. Welcome, everyone, and Happy New Year. My name is Robert Klee. I'm the chair of our Woodbridge Planning and Zoning Commission. Other members of the commission with us here tonight are Paul Schass, Kathleen Hunter, Yoni Samir, Robert Reed, Jeff Kennedy, Chadi Nujim, and our newest member. Welcome to Aaron Hoffman. You are now officially an alternate member, or Chris, does he need to be sworn in yet? Or he's sworn in. Well, thank you for joining us and for your service, and for joining us on a rainy night at the beginning of the new year. Chris, it is good to see you. Hope you had, everyone had a nice holiday, but Chris, I hope you had one as well. You are able town land use analyst and zoning enforcement officer. It's nice to be here in person. Tonight's agenda has been available on the town website, as are the materials in support of the public hearing we're going to have tonight. The public hearing, which is going to be our first order of business, is an application for a subdivision at 10 and 14 Merritt Avenue brought by Litchfield Turnpike LLC. It is a 15-lot subdivision. Then after that public hearing, we will have a bit of new business and then a work session in which we can discuss a long list of things that are on our agendas. So I think we should just jump right in and get the public hearing started for 10 and 14 Merritt Avenue. If the applicant would come forward and state your name for the record. Chris, do they sign in as well? Yes. And do all those good things?
All set?
Just before you go, and I assume everyone has a bunch of materials in front of them. You probably also, Aaron, you may not have these materials. You also probably had things from now 2 months ago, things like site plans, traffic impact studies, our town traffic consultant's response to that study, and then a response to the response, which just came in this afternoon, which, spoiler alert, may mean that we may end up continuing this hearing to make sure that our traffic engineer has time to present a full review of all the things that have been exchanged on this sort of day of the hearing.
Can we just note that Commissioner Skolnick has recused himself from this matter, so we'll seat one of the alternates in his place. And John Paul, if you could be so kind as to give me one more hard copy set for our new member who doesn't have a hard copy set yet.
Hard copy set of the drawings?
Yes,
Send it over tomorrow.
that's terrific.
I have an extra if you want to give him.
No, he
I'll send you a full
deserves a
set.
full
Okay.
set.
All right.
Alrighty, so I think we have the preliminaries out of the way, so the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is John Nuff. I'm an attorney with an office at 147 Broad Street, Milford, Connecticut, here tonight on behalf of the applicant, Litchfield Turnpike LLC. As you noted, Mr. Chairman, in the call, this is an application for a subdivision to create 15 lots. The property located at 10 to 14 Merritt Avenue. Just a little bit of history. We actually started this process about a year ago. Last February, we had our first, where we had a Zoom neighborhood meeting so we could inform the neighbors about what it is that we're proposing. Then we submit our wetland application. The wetland application was very closely scrutinized by Jim Preddy, who's a professional engineer, as well as Martin Brogy, who is a LEP and soil scientist. I think that went on for several different months, while John Paul Garcia, our professional engineer, was working through some of the particulars, as well as our own soil scientists. And at the end of the day, the wetland application was approved. Jim Preddy, or the town's professional engineer, was satisfied with all drainage issues. So, we've been working on the application with care and not trying to rush anything through, and we anticipate doing the same thing with this commission as well. As noted, John Paul Garcia is our professional engineers here, Steve Ullman, who is our traffic engineer, and you're right, Mr. Chairman, Steve submitted his traffic reports. We've gotten comments to the traffic reports. Steve submitted his responses, and so we're awaiting your peer reviewers' responses to those responses. But Steve will give the full traffic report. But I do want to provide at least a little bit of context. The application that's before you, you're acting in your administrative capacity. All the proposed lots comply with all your requirements. John Paul will be describing the open space that we're proposing to convey to the town in compliance with your 10% open space requirement. And then on the issue of traffic, and I don't, I'm sort of hesitant to say this, but I'm saying this only not as a challenge, not as throwing down a gauntlet, but just the state of the law is that when you're acting in your administrative capacity, whether on a subdivision application or on a site plan application, off-site traffic concerns are not a basis for denial. It is a conclusive presumption that if you have a permitted use, and a subdivision permitted use in this zone, that off-site traffic conditions are not a basis for denial. So we're happy to go through the process. We're happy to have the rapport with, or the dialogue with your own peer reviewer. But I mean, to the extent that you may hear tonight, any concerns raised on the issue of traffic is not a basis for your eventual decision to approve or deny, because there's the presumption that as a permitted use, that's already been accounted for. So with that, I'm going to give you John Paul Garcia, who will walk you through the site plan and the subdivision plan, then we'll get to Steve Ullman.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah, John, I think you'll need to stay either close to the microphone
Well, that's why I was gonna ask you if I could push this one on.
Yes, please.
It was on.
Oh, it was on, so, okay.
There you go.
For the record, my name is John Paul Garcia. I'm a licensed professional engineer and land surveyor, licensed to practice in the state of Connecticut with a principal office, 190 Fairwood Road in the town of Bethany. I'm here representing the owners of property on Merritt and Litchfield Turnpike. This is actually an interesting site because it's three separate it's two parcels. There's approximately 1.5 acres along Litchfield Turnpike, and there's 3.9 acres, or 3.6 acres in the back off of Merritt Avenue. And what that looks like is this. This is the gas. This is the gas station. That was just done a couple of years ago. This is now being run as a flower shop. The West River is right here, and then this sits behind that. This was used up until the 60s as a festival site and such. Now the intent is to subdivide that into 14 lots, of which 2 are already under construction that were done as part of a previous application. What's shown as lots 12 and 11 are now under construction. There's houses actually up there now, and they're in the process of doing the sewers. So the intent is to subdivide this into 2 parcels on Litchfield Turnpike, and then these parcels here. This is a 4,000 square foot zone. All the lots meet or exceed that. Some of them are 12, 15, 18,000 square feet. The lots are essentially way oversized for what's required by the zone. The West River runs along the center of the property, which would be the west side of the 3.6 acres under consideration for subdivision. That's been looked at by SCROG, and we'll go into that in a few minutes. The intent is to construct approximately 400 feet of new road, and all the houses will access off of that. The houses are duplex. Each one contains 2 units. Parking, there's 3 spaces per unit. There's 2 inside and 1 outside, at least 1 outside, so for the sake of argument. The way the houses are set up is that you have a full depth basement, so you can actually park 2 cars inside each garage, and then you have an additional space in front of the unit. The house is in an area that's known for flooding. As part of the wetlands application, we actually went back and raised all the houses to 2 feet above base flood elevation, and the first floors are 10 feet above that. So flooding was taken into account in the design of everything. I think 93 is the base flood elevation. I'd have to go back and look. But everything was raised so that the garage floors of all the units are 2 feet above the observed base flood elevation to take into account for flooding. There's really not much else to it. This shows what's going to be lawn areas and what's going to be left. The Merritt Parkway runs along the south boundary of the property, separated by about 50 to 60 feet of forested before you get to the actual park. The parcels themselves are in keeping with the neighborhood. Almost all the other parcels along Merritt Avenue are of this size. Some are bigger, some are smaller, but it's in keeping with the general outline of the neighborhood. There's really not much else to sell. It's serviced by city water and city sewer. We already have approval, and that should be part of your record, from Regional Water for water tie-in. We have approval from the Rain and New Haven Regional Water Authority for sewer tie-in. There's extremely large amount of excess sewage capacity, so that was not a problem. And the emails from Ricardo Sebelios at Regional Water should be part of your record. So we've already gone through the process of getting review and approval, and they're going to be under construction, starting to install the sewer here to service these two houses in the next couple of weeks, as soon as they finish paying the application fees. As John said, we have our traffic consultant here. We'll go over that in a minute. There's really not much else left to do. We've hit all the T's, dotted all, or crossed all the T's, dotted all the I's. The only open question here, and I see a couple of members of the Conservation Commission here, is we had a meeting with the Conservation Commission in an attempt to iron out the open space donation. What I'm going to do is pass out a worksheet. This is what we proffered. I think I have enough for everybody. If I have enough, I'll come back. Yes, I think I do have enough. What I'm showing, okay. There's a solid heavy blue line which runs along the West River. That's a trail easement.
You may need to be on the microphone.
I'm sorry, what?
On the microphone.
Yeah.
Thanks.
What that is a proposed trail easement that runs along the West River and connects to Merritt Avenue. That's in keeping with the Plan of Conservation and Development, and in keeping with the recommendations from COG, is to provide a connectivity, a corridor along the West River. We offered that to the Conservation Commission, and they have other feelings. So that was never resolved. But that's what we were proposing. It's in excess of 20,000 square feet. We can make it as large or as small as you want. But that was the offer. The reason it's not shown on the drawings is because we never finalized it. You know, excuse my French. We received no direction from the Conservation Commission, so it was left in limbo to determine from this commission. The other interesting thing is that as part of the wetlands application, there is a detention pond and overflow area behind the lots between the street and the West River. The town does not want ownership of the detention pond or the overflow area as far as maintenance of that. So you're actually segregating part of your storm drainage. The town maintains, this is a public road, and there's going to be a private association that maintains a detention basin and the back of these lots. And that will be set up as a condition of approval. But the town does not want ownership of the detention basin. That came out during the wetlands meeting, and we have no issues with that. So that's how we handle the storm drainage. It was designed for up to and including a 100-year storm event. We actually have overflow. The state wanted to see some overflow, and that's shown in here. So that's how we handle the stormwater. So that was taken care of as part of the the wetlands application. And that was reviewed by the town engineer, Jim Preddy, and the state, and it was signed off on. So that's basically the application. It's not a very complex site. It's a very small site. To be perfectly honest with you, I'm used to working on 1 acre, 2 acre, 3 acre lots, and here we're working on, 14,000 feet with, a house that takes up a good portion. Any questions?
I had a question. You have 14 units on that, correct? It's 15
That's-
lots, but 14 units? One of
That's
them-
correct.
So one of them's not being developed, or what?
No, this,
It would be later.
these are considered part of the subdivision,
Okay.
and these two were already approved and under construction.
So there were 14, looks like
There's
blocks.
gonna be 12, there's gonna be 12 new units here,
So a total of 14.
a total of 14, but 2 of those are already approved and under construction.
Are they on one lot?
Pardon?
Are they on
They're on
one
separate
lot?
lots. They're on separate parcels. That was part of an original, it was done under, everybody calls it the free split ordinance, but it's not an ordinance. It's actually a Connecticut general statute that subdivision regulations apply to 3 or more parcels. And then we created that as 2. So that's how it was done. And that was done all, we took it through the town. We went through all the steps through the town. We didn't just decide to do it and go ahead and build it. We never get zoning permits. So that was done all above board.
So did you want to continue with questions now, or did you want to do the traffic first and come back? Or
Whatever the commission prefers, but why don't we go to Steve Altman, he can discuss traffic.
Sure.
Thank you. If you could introduce yourself for the record, please.
Good evening. My name is Steve Ullman, U-L-M-A-N. I'm an engineer with Alfred Benish and Company of Glastonbury, Connecticut. I'm a professional engineer in the state of Connecticut and also a professional traffic operations engineer. As you know, we submitted a study back in, when this was first submitted. We received peer review comments just before Christmas. I responded to those comments and revised the traffic study, which you just received today. My testimony this evening will be the traffic as responded to with the peer review. All the peer review comments that I've incorporated will be what I'm presenting this evening. So it's now the most current version. As JP told you, it's on Merritt, this development's on Merritt Avenue. It's just east of Miles Avenue is where the driveway intersects Merritt. That drive is located approximately 380 feet to the east of Litchfield Turnpike Route 69. In this vicinity, Litchfield Turnpike is classified as an urban principal arterial, traveling the north-south direction. In Woodbridge, it's generally a 2-lane highway with additional turn lanes added at major intersections, usually signalized. The posted speed limit is 35 miles an hour. And in the immediate vicinity of the site, you have this intersection of Merritt Avenue and Litchfield Turnpike is signalized, and Lucy Street at Litchfield Turnpike is signalized. Technically, that is one traffic signal. Those 2 intersections are controlled by a single traffic controller, that is a state-controlled, state-operated traffic signal. In order to conduct the study, we did turning movement counts during the morning and evening PM peak periods in March of this year at Litchfield Turnpike at Merritt and Litchfield Turnpike at Lucy Street. Previously approved developments in the area but not yet built is the Woodbridge Village at 1710 and 1722 Litchfield Turnpike to the north of the site. This development is expected to add 7 vehicles to the roadway network in the vicinity of the site during the morning peak and 9 vehicles in the afternoon peak. That becomes important later. Crash data was obtained from the Yukon Crash Repository for 2 periods. The 3-year pre-pandemic period, 2017 through 2019, and the post-pandemic period, 2020 through October 31st of this year, for Lucy Street, Litchfield Turnpike, and the area we're studying. Review of the data shows that there were fewer post-pandemic crashes than pre-pandemic. 426 post-pandemic, 45 pre-pandemic. Most crashes were identified as 50 were rear-end crashes, and that accounted for 52% of the crashes. All the other crashes were reviewed, we looked at them. There are no crash patterns that indicate that there are geometric or signal or any deficiencies in the roadway network. What patterns we see are consistent for signalized intersections along an urban principal arterial roadway. Impact of the proposed development. We use the ITE trip generation, 11th edition, to calculate the number of new trips generated by this development. The land use used was single-family attached housing, land use 215. This is really what that land use is about. It's duplex units, 1, 2, or 3 homes. The anticipated number of new trips by this development is during the AM peak hour, there'll be 17 new trips, 4 of which are entering and 13 exiting. The evening peak hour is 20 trips, 12 vehicles entering and 8 vehicles exiting. We also measured the available site distances along the proposed drive to Merritt Avenue. The measured distance exceeds 335 feet, which is a required distance for 30 miles an hour, which is 5 miles an hour over the non-posted speed limit of 25. And to be honest, getting up to 30 miles an hour along Merritt Avenue is going to be a little bit difficult, but we have plenty of sight line for it. We then did capacity analyses at the 3 intersections. Litchfield Turnpike at Merritt Avenue, Litchfield Turnpike at Lucy, and Merritt Avenue at the new site driveway for 2 conditions. One, the 2024 no-build volumes. Those are the volumes anticipated to be in place right before the development opens. Picture of a normal retail type development. Day before it opens, the day after it opens, no build. The 2024 no build volumes were calculated by expanding the 2022 existing volumes by 1% per year for anticipated growth of just general nature developments we don't know about, changes in use, plus we then added those trips generated by the Woodbridge Village development. Then the 2024 build volumes were calculated by adding those site-generated trips I just noted to the 2024 no-build volumes. The analyses indicate that the intersection study will operate a level service D or better with the no-build volumes and continue to operate at level service D or better with 2024 volumes. The review of the analysis show that the development will have little impact on the individual approaches as well. The worst case was the Lucy Street, the southbound 69, we anticipated an increase of delay of only 3.9 seconds, and the anticipated 95th percentile cube increasing by only 3 feet. Very minimal impact to those intersections. Based on the findings of our report, it's our opinion, professional opinion, that the proposed Woodbridge residential development will not impede or adversely affect traffic operation on the adjacent roadway networks. And I'm here for questions, or let John continue.
That concludes our presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you all for your presentation, and I will now turn it to the members of the commission for questions they may have, and I'll ask that if you're asking different members of the applicant team, for the applicant team to come to the microphones as appropriate, or your easels. So would anyone on the commission like to start with a question?
I have a comment more than a question. So, that intersection between Lucy and, I guess, Merritt, those two lights, at peak and non-peak, well, primarily peak, morning and evening, you do find cars that block you know what I'm saying, right?
That was
So how,
that was part of the response to comments. that
Okay,
we just
thank you.
addressed. There are supposed to be do not block intersection signs per the DOT signal plan and they have been, I don't know, removed, never installed. So we will be contacting District 3 Maintenance to get those signs reinstalled. Those signs are missing from the intersection.
Okay.
There's a sign on Merritt Avenue. There's an advanced sign, I believe, southbound 69 still exists. I believe those are the only two signs that still exist.
And that's,
3 or 4 signs missing.
and I'm sorry, and that's fine in terms of corrective action. What about increasing the signals, the delay or increasing the signal timing to improve that congested area?
I can make that recommendation to have the DOT look at it. It is their intersections. They have, those signals were just done, not too long ago, but they retimed them. I believe they retimed them when they did the intersections, they did interchange. But I could include that in my letter to the district, that the department may want to look at retiming those intersections.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions from commission members? Commissioner, oh, sorry, I saw Paul's hand first. Sorry, Chadi. Paul, go ahead.
So I'm trying to understand, in here, you've got 14 duplexes and 28 residences,
Correct.
okay? So first, I don't know who to direct this to. So first, I think you said you've got a 2-car garage and 1 car on the street? So that's 3 cars per,
3 spaces per, there's parking for 3, that doesn't necessarily mean there's gonna be 3. It's a 2-bedroom unit. So,
so I'm sorry, and I probably missed something along the way. Of the 14 lots, each lot has a duplex with 2 different residences.
Correct.
Correct? So I know I'm not that smart, but wouldn't that be an average of 2 cars per unit?
I'm not sure I follow.
So if there's 28 units,
Yeah,
I think you said you've got 1.5 cars per unit budgeted.
3
3 per unit?
per unit. Each unit, there's, no, I'm getting lost in nomenclature. Each duplex has 2 units.
Yep.
Each unit
Yep.
has a full-length basement that goes the entire 40 feet. So there's parking for 2 cars inside if they want.
Okay.
And parking for 1 car outside if they want.
So there's
And
6
wait,
possible
and-
parking spots per lot.
That's correct.
And Paul, just to clarify, that one outside is on a driveway, not on the street.
That's correct.
So it's not
That
even
is
on the street.
correct.
Okay.
So that's right, I apologize, it's units, it's, I think a little bit differently.
Okay, so now you've got 6 possible cars per,
No,
per-
6
per
spaces,
lot.
does not necessarily mean it's gonna be
6, oh, that's fine, 6
Six
possible
spaces.
spaces. So in your report, it didn't seem like, and I don't know what the mathematics are behind it, but it didn't seem like you had counted, I wanna say there was like, was it 13 or 20 cars coming in or out during rush hour? With that many units and that many cars, it seemed a lower number than I would have imagined.
It's, the trip generation rates are based on studies done nationwide, empirical studies done at developments of this type. So people go out and actually study residential developments of this type, which is called the single-family attached, so 2 or 3 units. And the empirical data shows that for 28 units, 28 dwelling units, that you would have only 17 trips per, in the morning total, and 20 in the afternoon. And from my experience, it's actually higher than, let's say, an apartment use, believe it or not. Apartment uses generally generate about 50% per unit for the peak hour. Now remember that people arriving, going to work, coming from work, really happens over a 2-hour period. Okay? And so what we studied is the heaviest peak hour of that 2-hour period. So you may have 28, 30, 34 cars during the entire 2-hour period, but during the heaviest hour, it's 17.
And is from the empirical data, is it strictly quantitative? There's no discretionary element involved in your?
It's just, they go in, you have a formula.
Yep.
And you put in the number of dwelling units. And then you get an answer based on that formula. And you get two answers for a lot of these, which is an average rate or a calculated rate. And in both cases here, I use the calculated rate because it's higher. The average rates are slightly lower.
So whether this was in Kansas, Maine, or California, it's
Or
the
New
same
York,
formula.
Or New York, Long Island, New
Yeah,
York.
it's the same formula.
New Haven, correct. Because the studies are all then combined, and you get weighted averages based on, not weighted averages, but your equations are based on the studies done at different locations. So at one location, you may have 20 units, and at 20 units, you have 3 data points. At 40 units, you may have 5 or 6. At 60 units, you may have 1. At 70, you may have 8. And you then take those data points and take a best fit curve between the points to come up with the number. So that is, and that's true of all land uses in the ITE, trip generation rate. That's the methodology we use for any kind of development. You know, you have trip generation rates for single-family homes, the multifamily. You have 3 different rates for apartments. There are all sorts of retail, industrial, but that's how those numbers are calculated.
Okay, and just speaking anecdotally, because my office is down there, I mean, I agree with Robert, you know, that Lucy, Merritt, Manila intersection it's the most brutal in the whole area. I mean, I've taken sometimes a half an hour to get on the Merritt, you know, 1/10 of a mile away. And I'm not disparaging or blaming you, but I'm just saying anecdotally, it's a really frustrating area.
And anecdotally, I'll be perfectly upfront with you, and I probably shouldn't say this, but Steve did the traffic study when we did the gas station. We spent a small fortune and a lot of blood and sweat doing those intersections. And within 8 months to a year after my client, the guy who did the gas station, spent a small fortune redoing those signals, DOT came through and did them again, and they screwed them up. And they're still working on it. When I talked to DOT, they've got a whole new signalization plan. No matter what we do today, if we went in and rebuilt that entire intersection, they've got a new plan coming a year from now or 2 years from now. They haven't figured it out yet, quote unquote.
And like I said,
And-
I'll even submit a copy of the study for them to look at, but these are state signals, and they're gonna try and optimize them for 69, north and south. And if they do more optimization that's out there now, then Lucy Street and Merritt are gonna suffer for capacity. And, because you're trading one for the other. Other than that, I don't have, the other thing I think you'll probably notice, I drive by every day on the Parkway, and I glance down this way every so often if I see all the traffic on the ramps. And I would be willing to bet, based on my 30 years of driving through here, you have more variation at those 2 intersections based on what's going on the Parkway than other things. If you have, because I've seen it, the ramp down to 69 going southbound going home, half full, all of a sudden, but there's a crash up at Racebrook Road on the Parkway. Now the cars are trying to get on 69 off on the Parkway backing up, and I gotta believe that 69 is messed up because of that. Actually, I'll forward the information to the district, but that's really all we can do.
Chadi, I know you were waiting patiently. You had a question, was it?
The average rates you discussed for the development, is that the demographics come into play? Like, do demographics here may be different for who's occupying these spaces?
The whole nature of the trip generation is that the studies are done in enough different areas that
Washes it out.
demographics don't come into play. We're starting to see in some of the residential uses, predominantly the larger apartment uses, breakdowns of within a half mile of train in a dense urban area, those type of demographics. But for the normal residential, the single family, multifamily townhouse, even the low-rise apartment, we're not having any of that data yet. But no, the data is such that, it is, like I said, based on developments all over, from Long Island, wherever. And I should note that I actually used, at peer review's request, I didn't use the normal rates I would normally use. I used the more conservative rates. There are two rates, it only mattered by about 3 cars, so it really didn't make that much of a difference. There are rates based on peak hour of the adjacent street or peak hour of the development. Like I said, it mattered about 3 cars, 4 cars. I used, at Chris's request, the peak hour of the development. So that's because peak hour development may or may not coincide with.
So going back to those numbers, you said 17, was it 17 trips?
17 trips in the morning, 20 in the evening.
So in layman's terms, that's 17 people getting in 17 cars, leaving at the same time at
For an hour.
7:30,
Correct.
whatever it is.
And anecdotally, I'll give you my household back in 2017. 3 people driving to work every day, driving home from work every day. Only 1 peak hour trip, me coming home at night usually. My wife worked 9 to 6. My son was working at part-time, either 9 to 2 or 9 to 5, or 2 to 5. And I would always leave at 6. So our household, we only had 1 peak hour trip for the whole day. Now, my neighbor across the street,
May have 28
they
households.
both worked at the same hospital. They made up for it because they both left during the morning peak and both left in the afternoon. But that's how these things work.
Yeah.
That's why you
And
get
it's
these numbers.
prior to remote work.
And that was prior to remote work. And
Yeah.
that, so that also, we don't know. We talk about something you may hear from other traffic engineers, is that during COVID, we used to have to, we did counts, we had to adjust back. We no longer do that. We're in what we call the new normal. Typically, volumes are slightly lower than they were pre-COVID across the board. And I've also noticed in a couple of them that the peaks tend to be a little bit different than they were. They're tending to run about the same in the morning, but a little bit earlier in the evening. Whether that's going to keep on going, we have no idea. But at this point, we assume that we're in a new normal, that, you know, my son works remote now completely. I don't.
So what does that mean for the people on Merritt, the residents on Merritt Ave and this new street, in terms of getting out? I don't think it's gonna be an impact to the 69 traffic, because it's
No,
higher
no.
volume. But what does it mean for them? What does it mean for the buses coming in and leaving in the morning, for students at various times?
You're not gonna see any real difference in the traffic, on Merritt Avenue. I don't have it top of my head, but. I can hold it quick there. Okay, the Merritt Avenue increases by 1 second in the morning, average delay, and less than a second in the afternoon, average delay.
So so 17 cars leaving at the same time.
Well, it's not 17 cars leaving, that's total AM peak.
So it's like 1 every 3 minutes.
It's, entering the site will be 4, exiting is 13 vehicles in the morning.
Okay. Sorry, I don't understand how that 1 second comes into play. Like, it
That's
can't,
average delay per vehicle at the intersection,
average weight per vehicle, you said?
an extra second. Which, in reality, you never notice it. And that's more, you have more variation in that, it's a fully actuated signal. You have more variation in that as how well people clear out of the intersection. How quickly someone gets off the line when the light changes. That's something else I've noticed since COVID, is people tend to be more distracted. Hopefully that will change. But, you know, those 1 second of delay really gets eaten up by those kind of things. Someone texting, they need up 3 or 4 seconds real easily, and the next cycle, person just goes. And depending which cycle you hit the light at,
And did you guys say the person that developed the gas station had to pay to rejigger the intersection?
We paid a small fortune, and Steve did, the short version is the DOT traffic does not talk to DOT rights away. The DOT is very dysfunctional. And we were all set to start construction when we get a phone call that, well, the signal plan wasn't approved, if you remember that meeting.
we had to revise the signal plan. Now, construction was, I don't think was gonna be bid within a year. So we had to, for the coming off, we had to add signal heads, and add pedestals, we had to add detection, and we had to add, revise the pavement markings from the northbound ramps all the way past our site to the shopping center drive. And then they came in, by the time they got it all constructed, it was probably 8 months.
Yeah.
They came in and tore it all up.
And by the way, we understand the frustration, but state roads are just that, state roads. The town has no control, whether it's Woodbridge or Branford or Fairfield or Enfield.
Yep, we
People
understand.
get frustrated with how the DOT does things, but it's wholly their jurisdiction.
And they're completely redoing everything from the tunnel up, halfway up the road, halfway up the hill, all the way north to the other side of Lucy Street and south to Whaley Avenue. That's all under consideration for redoing.
And 63.
And
as well.
63, all, that whole intersection. So when you talk to DOT traffic and parking, you may get one answer. When you talk to DOT signalization, you may get an entirely different answer.
And like I said, I will include that with my letter to the district. As a commission, if you can ask your town's legal traffic authority, probably the police chief, to also write a letter about these intersections, that may carry more weight, to be honest. Because they're gonna look at my study and say, oh, we're only adding 17 trips. I got bigger fish to fry. Because, you know, I know it's your town, I know we're adding 17 trips, but, you know, there are other issues.
Other questions?
Not for traffic, no.
If folks don't mind, can I hop in with a few things? One, just so we're all crystal clear, the 17 or the 20 trips, that's during the peak hour. So a good way to think about those is 17 over 60 minutes, or 20 over 60 minutes is about a
Correct.
car every 3 minutes,
Yeah.
in theory, on average, which is why you probably get to that 1 second
Yep,
sort of rule.
yep.
I'd like to move off of traffic, if I could, for a moment, but it's tangentially related. Attorney Nuff, you did mention in your opening about off-site traffic not being a basis for denial of applications. We've heard that before in front of our commission quite recently, I believe, with some case citations, so I'd invite you, I think we're continuing to provide appropriate case citation or even copies of them, so we
Sure,
understand.
happy to. I mean, it's now well-known in Connecticut, you know, jurisprudence, it's Pansy Road versus Fairfield PNC. So, but I'd be happy to provide a short summary or the case itself, but it's very explicit.
How about both for the record?
Yeah,
So we
happy
have
to.
that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Then I'd like to move to the open space, and so, John Paul, we go back to the handout that you gave us, and I would love for you to just walk me through it again so I understand. We should be focused on this heavier blue line that's kind of going through the
Yes.
West River, And you said that was 20,000 feet. How
Approximately
many,
20,000 square feet,
how large is that in acres?
half acre.
That's a half acre.
You're required, by your regulations, you want 10%. And so we have to meet the minimum. You also have the option of getting fee in lieu of. But your plan of conservation and development, your report from SCOG, everybody wants connectivity between Whaley Avenue, up Whaley Avenue into Woodbridge for a trail. They want to provide a trail along the West River. So that's what we provided.
And I just wanted to be clear on the 10% requirement is,
That's your open space requirement.
Right,
Correct.
so
how large is what does 20,000 square feet represent in terms of percentage of the?
The total parcel is 4.9 acres.
That's what I was
So
trying to do
five-
the math,
That's
so-
200,000 square feet.
So it is,
10% is 20,000. We can make it bigger if you like, we can make it smaller. It doesn't have to be exactly 10%. You may decide to say, oh no, only make it 15 feet wide along the edge of the river, in which case it may be 7,000. You may say, well, make it wider over here, so we have some additional room. We can give you more room.
understood, I just wanted you to help me with the math, so
Yeah.
I knew that
It's
this 20,000.
approximately total, Litchfield Turnpike in this piece is approximately 5 acres. And technically, if you take out the river, it's less than that, but 5 acres is approximately 220,000 square feet. 10% is 22,000 square feet. We're dealing in round numbers.
And just to be clear, what your subdivision regulations say is the commission may require that a tract of land to be
Yeah.
subdivided to be 10%. So, you know, if you wanted more, if you wanted less, but, you know, it's, you're not obligated to, and we're more than happy to give it to you, but this is open space that makes sense, because you also have two other provisions in Chapter 7, and those are paragraphs C and D. C says that these open space should have access to a public street or right-of-way dedicated for public use. And more importantly, D talks about sort of the substantive nature, that you want this to be open space that's relevant, that can actually provide recreation for people. And it says, when a property line of a subdivision abuts an existing playground or public land, the commission may require the new open space, park, and recreation area boundaries to form a continuation of the existing playground or public land to form a single unified area. Well, where we're providing this open space makes a lot of sense, because it provides public access. To do it someplace else, you know, doesn't provide any connectivity, and is just sort of, I guess, punitive, for lack of a better word.
And so I wanted to also just make sure I understood that in your conversation with the town regarding not including the detention basins, the town is a whole bunch of things. Is this with the town inland wetlands, or was it with the town attorney, or with?
As a condition of approval for the inland wetlands permit, the developer will retain ownership and maintenance of the detention basin. The town, as a general rule, the town does not want to have to deal with a detention basin for some reason, even though it's part of the storm drainage. And Woodbridge is not alone, a lot of towns have done this.
Understood, they don't want to own it, maintain it, have to mow it, have to do whatever they want to do.
That's
Right.
correct.
So I just want to be clear that that was in your wetlands.
That was
inland
a
wetlands.
condition of the wetlands approval,
Gotcha.
which should be you should have a copy of that in your package.
I think we do. Those were my key questions, though I would love that sort of follow-up, as depicted, the 20,000 foot, if you can actually, square foot, translate that into, that is X percent. I know our,
That's 10%. What's shown there
rough,
is
it is roughly, but I would love the actual math.
well, when we come to a consensus, I don't want to go through the grief and aggravation of revising all these drawings and all these lots to show a property that is not going to get transferred. That's why we didn't show it as part of this application, but I'm bringing it to your attention, that we had discussions with the Conservation Commission, a consensus wasn't reached, so it's in limbo, so it's up to the Planning and Zoning Commission to tell me what they want to do.
So that raised another, if not this, then what did the Conservation Commission
I'll
folks
leave that to
ask?
them, but I'll leave that to the Conservation Commission. 3 members are here behind me. You can discuss it with them.
Okay.
I'm not gonna get into that argument.
How wide is, at the narrowest point, how wide is this open space?
15 to 20 feet. And that's at the north end near the pond, near the detention basin. And we can make, the southern side, we can make it as wide as you guys want.
Just looking again at this map, just on here, in this blue area, which would be the easement, the trail easement that was.
Well, it's actually, I apologize, and again, I misspoke. It's not an easement, it's a fee simple. You own it. The town, that would be a transfer.
Gotcha.
Has the town confirmed that they want this piece of property?
Well, that's up to you guys. In other words, I'm making the offer, this is what I think you should have. And I think it should be in fee simple. I think the town should own it. That way they can put a trail on it, they can do whatever they want with it. With an easement, sometimes things get a little shaky about what gets done. So my recommendation is always take it in fee simple.
Well, it's also what your subdivision regulations say, paragraph I, a warranty deed for such land to the town or its designee shall be submitted by the applicant prior to the approval. So, once we determine the boundaries of this, we will give you a draft warranty deed with an exhibit with the property descriptions as we all agree upon.
So it says that and again, I know you want to let them respond, but the letter from Tim Oster, Chair of Woodbridge Conservation Committee, states that they were looking for, in fact, they passed a motion to request TPZ that lots 13 and 14 be used as open space. The open space also be identified in the maximum amount of land in the southeast corner, which does not include the retention basin. Southeast corner.
Okay,
So,
well, if we're gonna go
I mean,
into
if you
that,
don't mind, just for time's sake, I don't
then
want to
if we're gonna
preempt
go
them.
into that,
of
we
course.
might as well go into it now.
Yeah.
At the Conservation Commission meeting, it was stated point blank, and it's part of the record, that the reason they're asking for 13 and 14 as open space is because it reduces the density. That's number one. There's no connectivity to 13 and 14. It makes absolutely zero sense from a planning point of view, because you go nowhere. This is 13 and 14 right here. So you walk up in here, you circle around like a gerbil in a cage, and you walk back out again. This provides the connectivity along the West River corridor, which is something everybody and his brother's been asking for 30 years. It's included in your plan of conservation and development, and SCOG actually, the Regional Council of Government, actually has that in their letter. It makes no sense to grab these two, because it goes nowhere. It doesn't provide a corridor to anything.
And you were planning to build on 13 and 14, am I understanding
Yeah,
that correctly?
there's proposals for that.
But but won't this blue parcel that's on the map, isn't that gonna be left open in the end? If, assuming this gets approved and developed and finished the way it's currently planned, is this not gonna end up?
Open space is used for a number of things.
Right.
One of which is to provide a function for the town. It has to have a legitimate use. 35 years ago, when they first started with the concept of open space, towns were getting parcels stuck every place willy-nilly. And all of a sudden, they discovered that we've got these liability issues. We have a piece of property stuck in the middle of a subdivision, which is a liability issue. The town owns it, it doesn't do anything for us, but we can accept 100% of the liability. So a lot of the towns stopped doing it. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Milford's one of the towns you could give open space to with a gun. They want 10% cash. They want fee in lieu of. You couldn't, if I remember correctly, the last time I did something in Milford said, we want nothing to do with open space. We want the money, we'll buy the open space. So that's the way some towns have approached this. In this particular case, we have a perfect opportunity to provide the river corridor. They're spending a small fortune to restore the West River. They've got fish traps up in Knoll's Pond. The dam is scheduled for removal. The dam in Knoll's Pond, I don't know if anybody knows where that dam is, at the south side of Knoll's Pond. That dam is scheduled for removal. And so there's a lot of interest in this corridor. So it makes the most sense to provide the trail easement from New Haven to here. Now, the problem that you have is you can't go from here, you have to walk up Little Avenue and around. But that was, 40 years of bad planning.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that last part?
Pardon?
Could you repeat that last part about the access on the?
Yeah, the access, you're coming up from Pond Lily,
Yep.
you come up the edge of the river, and you end up on Merritt Avenue, and now you gotta take a right to go up Miles Street, or Miles Avenue, and then around, and that gets you back up into the corridor that exists north of Knoll's Pond. There's nothing you can do between Merritt Avenue and Bradley Road, because it's been built on, it's been a lot of encroached, and a lot of that was done prior to, the way we're approaching development now. I think if you tried to do those houses along 69 on the east side of 69 today, I don't think it would look anything like it looks now.
So just to get back to this blue section right on this map, right? When I'm looking at this blue section, and again, it's also pointed out in the letter from, right? So that this extends, part of it, it says wetlands right here. So if
Yeah.
at some point in the future, a person wants to hike and do that whole hike, and I've walked this section of land previously with, you know, just with a group before, just kind of looking and surveying and understanding with the Knoll's Pond like that. So I'm familiar with this, but, so this says wetlands. So what does that mean to me if I'm in the future potentially hiking here?
This is the wetlands line is this red line
Yeah,
along the edge, and so you've got about, here you've got about 25 or 30 feet. Here you have about 15 or 20 feet of upland area that you can put a trail on.
but then this detention basin, this is an actual like pond.
Yeah, and it should be dry 90% of the time, and this goes around it. This goes around it and comes back out on the Merritt Avenue.
Why does it extend into the middle of the river?
Because that's where the property line is for these.
Ah, I see.
So it makes it cleaner. I mean, and
Right.
plus, to be honest with you, you don't want to have a strip of land owned by somebody else next to your trail easement, next to a strip of land owned by somebody else. It starts to get real funky.
Sure.
So it's cleaner this way. Does it mean that the town can go in and start to dredge the West River, do whatever? No, it doesn't. But it's just a convenient break point because it separates the Litchfield Turnpike site to the Merritt Avenue site. It's just cleaner that way.
Sure.
But you're getting about 20 feet of upland, wide enough to put a trail, you can probably even put a vehicle on. You know, a lot of towns, when they build trail easements, they make them wide enough for a rescue vehicle, like a mule or one of these all-terrain vehicles.
And you're saying that 90% of the time, this area with the overflow area and the detention basin, you think is gonna be fairly dry, like
I
a
know for a
person
fact
walks
it's
in?
gonna be fairly dry.
Yeah.
That's the way they're not designed to hold water. They're designed to drain, and the soils up here are very sandy. It's a glacial outwash. It's almost all sand and gravel. We did a bunch of test pits up there. The static water level is down at the level of the river, which is about 8 feet down. So the bottom of the pond isn't that low. So in periods of high water, like we would have today or tomorrow, the pond would start to fill up. And then as the rain stops, the pond would start to go down, and then whatever in the bottom of the pond would infiltrate out. That's the way they're designed to work. Now, at some point, some of the ponds may require some maintenance, because what you'll start getting is phragmites especially. You'll start getting debris and leaf litter, and the pond may start to hold a little water. But for the most part, they almost always dry out. They're designed to dry out in between events.
Gotcha. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I know we're on the topic of the letters from the Conservation Commission, but the Conservation Commission can only appear for us in the 3-minute public speaking portion.
That's your choice. They're not a member of your commission, but you don't have to limit them to 3 minutes.
Well, but we normally don't ask questions when we enter the public comment period, where it's usually, we're receiving
They're
comment.
not technically a member of the public. They're another advisory commission that has a function in terms of advising you on what they believe the open space should be. So it's your choice if you want to limit it to 3 minutes.
And/or questioning, asking them
Right.
questions. Thank you. But I'll still ask my questions for the applicant, because you were there, we weren't. From the 2 letters we have a January 4th letter, which appears to focus on this West River connection, but then we have the June 30th, 2022 letter that then shifts its focus to lots 13 and 14 on a commission passed a motion to request that the attention focus there. First, was that a unanimous motion to?
I'm sorry,
Was that unanimous, that motion to only focus on lots 13 and 14 for open
What's
space?
that?
Was it unanimous?
I have no clue, you'd have, there didn't seem to be a consensus, but the consent, if three of the four people or five people there, a couple of them wanted 13 and 14, and the stated, it's part of the record, the stated use was to reduce the density. Again, you can see the plan, there's no valid reason to take out two lots in the middle of a subdivision when there's no connectivity to anything. Whereas you have the West River, which is specifically stated in your plan of conservation and development, specifically stated in the COG letter, that they want the connectivity.
Other questions from the commission members?
A couple more. Rob, just for my understanding,
Wait, Chad, you may need to get closer to the mic.
the southbound side of this open space that's coming in from New Haven, I take it?
That's correct, under the Parkway Bridge.
Okay, now which side is the bridge on over here, right?
The bridge is right here.
Okay, so is this the walkway coming in right here?
This-
Like
this-
the sidewalk, whatever you call it, under
Yeah,
the
that
bridge?
sidewalk's over here or over here on Pond Lily.
Okay.
And then there's about 80 to 100 feet of dirt that comes in before it butts up against the woodwork.
So people can walk that
Yeah.
way into
Oh,
this
yeah.
West River
That's the whole idea.
open space?
That's the whole idea.
And the developer retains maintenance of the
He has
detention
to,
basin?
he has to provide a mechanism to retain and maintain the detention basin.
And is that maintenance like a regular type maintenance? Is it once a year? Is it once every
Yeah,
5
that
years?
you would look at it, in theory, the way these things are designed, or the way we design them, is they should get very little debris. You have 4-foot sumps, you have a sediment forebay, which is that round series of rock. This is where the pipe comes in here on the left, and then there's a series of rocks here that make like a stone wall. It's called the sediment forebay. What's that designed to do is slow down the velocity of the water coming in. You're not gonna get a lot of water to begin with, you're not gonna get a lot of sand and debris. This isn't 69, this is a 400-foot road, so you're not gonna get, a sanding truck up here dumping 50 yards every time it snows. You may get 2 or 3 yards, and most of that should end up in the catch basins. That's why you put a 4-foot sump in. So if the town does their maintenance, which is always questionable, then those basins should be sucked clean every year, or every 2 years, or every 3 years. What you have then getting into the pond is the stuff that falls, leaf debris and everything else, and whatever gets by in turbulent flow, the catch basins. You get a 6-inch rain event, you get a mental 500-year event. You may get a lot of turbulent flow, and all bets are off. But the idea of that sediment forebay is so that when the water comes in, it creates a barrier, it slows the water down, creates turbulence behind the wall, and the sediments fall out. So that the water leaving the pond is now cleaned. So there's a 3-step process so that the water entering the river is cleaned.
What happens when maintenance doesn't occur on this detention
In
basin?
theory, you probably got about 10 to 20 years. Have they ever maintained the ones over on, that we did for Busman's? Have anybody's ever been in those ponds?
Yeah.
Oh, they have been in? Okay. In theory, you probably got 10 or 20 years worth of storage capacity behind the forebay. Again, like I'm saying, you're talking, I forget the exact calculation, but I would assume they're probably gonna use a yard and a half of sand. Is the town still using sand, or are they using salt?
I think they're just mainly salt.
It's just mainly salt. If they're using sand, you're probably gonna get a yard or a yard and a half of sand spread on a 400-foot road in the course of a snowstorm. Do it 10 times, that's 10 yards. Each one of those basins has a capacity of about 15 cubic feet. So the basins will probably take 99% of that. So the rest of the sand that ends up in the forebay, those forebays have a capacity, of dozens of cubic yards. So in theory, the way I design my ponds is that you shouldn't have to go into them for 10 to 15 years. I don't want people mucking around them. And if I want them mucking around them, I just want them in the forebay, I don't want them in the pond itself.
So the risk of something occurring and moving towards the residents in these new lots is low.
It's physically impossible. The residences are 3 feet higher in base flood. So, we've all seen Lucy Street and we've all seen 69 underwater.
Yeah.
Well, the new bridge, The new bridge was built a foot below base flood, the bottom of the bridge, so that bridge is a problem.
Okay.
That brand new bridge that they built 3 years ago is a problem, and that's part of the wetlands record. The houses are 4 feet above the bottom of that bridge. So that should restrain.
When you define the houses, is it the lowest
The
level of the
duplex, yeah, the
basement?
lowest level, concrete. So in theory, there should be no water getting within 2 feet or 3 feet
Of the bottom
of
of
the
the
garage
garage?
floor of these
The
buildings.
bottom of the garage?
Yeah, the road may flood, and I doubt that very, very much, but the houses will not flood.
Okay.
And the living areas will not flood because that's 10 feet, it's even 10 feet higher.
Okay.
Oh, no, we took a long look at that. I grew up in this area. I'm very, very cognizant of that.
Thank you.
So just to clarify, I think on our existing conversation, the blue section on this that you have here, that's the 10% set aside, correct?
Yes.
And if on a heavy rain day, like today or tomorrow, what percentage of that has water on it?
0, because it's,
Because this is kind of in the
Here's the
middle of the
river.
river, right?
here's the river.
Right. Okay.
5 feet away is the top of the bank, about this tall. If you've been down there, it's about 5
Okay.
feet. So, in a normal rainstorm, there's no water on that right away.
In the 10% set aside, there is
Yeah,
no
and
water.
there should be no water.
Okay.
Now, in an 80 to 100 year event, you will get some water. But again, as the river goes down, the water disappears. And no one's gonna be out hiking in a 100 year flood event. Well, a 1% flood event.
Okay.
I hope not.
Other questions from commission members? Paul?
The general one, I'm sorry if I missed it earlier. Who is the LLC for this?
Litchfield Turnpike LLC, I believe.
And who is that?
Developers.
I'm sorry,
The principal's Michael Massimino.
are they local developers?
He's done work throughout the state, yeah.
But I didn't see it in any of the documents. They're local businessmen like New Haven County?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
their offices in Brantford, and they've got 4 going now, I think.
right.
They've done 2 on Merritt Avenue already, and they're doing these 2 now.
So, I'm sorry. If they're a developer, why do they have Litchfield Turnpike LLC? What's the purpose?
There isn't a commercial property anywhere that's not owned in an LLC. The LLC statutes were created for that purpose. It's liability protection so that people can, organize their affairs in a way that makes sense and not subject themselves to bankruptcy.
Any other questions?
Rob, I have a question for you. So with the open space, what if the open space isn't there? What happens with that property? Does it stay with the developer and they have to figure out what to do with it?
So those are probably things that we would be discussing in our deliberation section, so I'm trying to rephrase that in a way that it's not showing that we've made a decision at all about the open space or any choices on the open space. But in theory, our subdivision regulations, and I'm looking over to Chris to make sure that I actually have them in my pile of paper, it is permissive for us, the languages we may require up to 10% open space, although.
Yep.
So in this particular case, you're not, in the last subdivision you just approved, you had a waiver request for the provision of open space. In this case, they are offering you 10% open space.
No, I understand.
So we have flexibility in deciding what they've offered as open space. We may hear from the Conservation Commission on their thoughts on open space. We can be independent of that and come up with our own views on open space requirements here. And I guess we could even ask them, no, we don't think we need any open space here. We'd rather you just ask for a waiver if we wanted to go that direction. Those are all kind of options on the table. I'm not saying we're
I know
doing
that.
that. I'm just saying there's a whole panoply of options.
Philosophically, I'll give it to you anyways. I think that's the wrong way, but that's okay.
So our language, we always have to be careful because there's this last page of our
The
subdivision
appendices, yeah, that replaces
regulations,
them, yeah.
which amended them in 1993 to have a bit more mandatory language about any plan to subdivide a tract of land shall include a proposal for open space at the proportionate rate of 10% of the gross acreage. For the location, size, nature shall advance the planning and policy goals set forth in these provisions. The commission may require the area to be dedicated to be representative of the total land in the tract. The commission may waive or modify the open space land dedication requirement or any part of it if in its judgment the purposes of this chapter would not be served by the strict enforcement. So yes, there shall be 10%, but we may waive or modify any part of it. So that's where that flexibility. Yoni, sorry.
No problem. I may have mentioned this in the previous meeting, but so these are gonna be duplexes, a total of, they're each 2-bedroom units and each duplex has two bedroom units, right? And the developer will then, presumably sell them to individual, buyers.
His goal is actually to maintain ownership and rent them, but, I mean, that's sort of irrelevant to your regulations.
Yeah, no, I was just curious.
Right,
just for
but
public
at the end of the
information.
day, the plan is to maintain ownership and rent each of them.
Gotcha, okay.
Any other questions? Recognizing that we haven't yet heard from our own traffic engineer, who will have just received today the review of the review, so we will be back, and they'll be back again in front of us at a next meeting. We'll talk about that at the end of when that's gonna be, so. Any other questions right now for the applicants? Because our next move is to move to our public hearing portion. So thank you very much to the applicants for your presentations. We'll give you a moment to collect your things. Does anyone on the commission need a bathroom break?
Yes.
That's why I asked. So we'll take a 5-minute recess. Is that okay? Thank you. And then for members of the public, we're off record, so I'll tell you when we get back. Our next portion is our public comment portion. This portion of the public hearing is for the purpose of listening to comments from members of the public. Members of the public will have up to 3 minutes for their brief statements into the record. For our members of the public, our TPZ members and the applicants will not be answering any questions that you raise. However, your public statements and any written comments that are submitted to the town will become part of the public record for the TPZ for our consideration of this application. As a reminder, everyone, off-the-record communication with a member of the commission on the merits of this application is prohibited. I ask that the members of the public keep their comments brief and focused on the proposed subdivision application and try to avoid unreasonable repetition so we can hear from all the concerns from you and your neighbors have. So for folks, I'm going to be using my phone for a 3-minute timer for folks who are doing the public comment. Chris, we haven't had a fellow sister commission come before us in the past, but I think it's a good thing to have happen. Do we have them go after our public comment or before it? Or as part of it?
Whatever you choose to do.
And for our representatives from the Open Space Commission would be an exception where we would actually be able to ask questions of them. Okay, so is there a representative of the Open Space Commission? We'll start with them. Conservation, sorry, thank you. Conservation Commission. You can come up as a team and bring a chair and introduce yourself and put your names in the record.
There's 4 of us, but I think 2 are coming up right now.
And I will give you more than the 3 minutes, but I will ask that you be brief.
My name is Paul Harrigan, and I'm here this evening to represent the Conservation Commission. I'm joined here with Sharon DeCat, Valerie King, and Tim Austin is also in the room. We wanted to explain and give you an opportunity to ask us questions on our recommendation for open space. I think the description of our conversation with the developer's representative is not exactly accurate, but hopefully we can clarify what our recommendations were. The Conservation Commission held a special meeting to view the site with the public in attendance on January 4th, 2022. We met with the developer's representative at a regular meeting at a later date. The Conservation Commission considered the provisions of Section 8 of the 1993 subdivision regulations. The most relevant elements that we considered was the commission may require a proportionate rate of 10% of the land to be subdivided, be reserved as open space, parks, or recreation areas. That the open space should be accessible by public streets. The open space should also be roughly rectangular, whose average greatest dimension is not more than 3 times its lesser dimension. Be representative of the land being subdivided, which is also key. And that if there's any trails on the property, that be considered, that have been identified in the plan of development and be incorporated in development. In summary, in considering the above, the Conservation Commission recommended that Lot 13 and 14 and as much of the narrow strip of land along the river be open space. The exact wording of our motion recommending the open space was lots 13 and 14 be used as open space in the Merritt Avenue subdivision. That open space be also identified as the maximum amount of land in the northeast corner, which does not include the retention basin nor the proposed overflowed area next to the river. It's a bit of a word salad, but just to explain, our recommendation is lot 13 and 14, as I mentioned, and also the very thin strip of land that's along the river. In describing the land that's the developers proposed to provide the town, there was a significant portion of that land that is actually underwater and in the river. So it's really not usable land. Couple other comments with respect to our discussion, and we tried to be collaborative, and I think there was some benefit to that. But the space that was proposed by the developer is not buildable land, is not representative of the subdivision, and a significant portion of the land is underwater. And again, those five items that I read off in terms of the major things that we considered, the land that's proposed by the developer has some use for open space, but we felt that Lot 13 and 14 provided also good access for open space in that it's connected by a city street. It also connects to the wetlands in the back and West Rock in the back also. I don't know if you want to add any more comments to that, Sharon.
I think that was well said. I think, having been on the Wetlands Commission for years, it seems self-evident or somewhat evident that the retention basin that they're offering or right near there is already restricted use and shouldn't necessarily be considered land that's been offered to us for conservation, and it won't have a natural environment. It will be maintained and altered as it should be to maintain it as a retention basin. And the overflow is, again, an area that's subject to being interfered with because it's acting as a necessary wetlands function. And I really think that the half that's river, being part of the 20,000 square feet, is kind of not very buildable and not very representative and kind of a way to mitigate the amount of land that
I think the spirit of the regulations are to promote the state's objectives of increasing the amount of open space in town, and frankly, that property is not buildable, and the property that we've proposed is buildable property that could be preserved as open space and provide the benefits of open space in terms of climate change and recreational, and just frankly, the general benefits of open space. And I think combining Lot 13 and 14 in that very thin strip of land, it could be used as a pathway for connecting the paths if they ever do go up further up to Knowles Pond, would be of benefit. But I guess you can hear what the residents also think of our proposal, but I think this would make a nicer environment with more usable open space than just a very thin, unbuildable piece of land. Frankly, if the commission decided to waive the open space requirement, that land that's being proposed as open space nothing could ever be done with it anyway. So it's really kind of a free giveaway.
Thank you. Questions from commission members?
You said lot 13 and 14 have access via a road?
Yes, so Lot 13 and 14 are also connected on the new street that's being put in. So
By a tiny strip of land.
Right.
Yeah.
So that means the residents in that neighborhood and also the new residents that live in this development would have access to that land. And that's one of the requirements of the open space set aside.
Other questions?
I guess in terms of procedures, when you are recommending open space, this, as I understand it now, this gets recommended to CUPOP, who then makes then makes a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, if I understand that procedure.
I think the procedure or the process is a little bit dysfunctional at this point because the town hasn't done a lot of subdivisions or done any subdivisions in a very long time. So there really isn't a very well-defined process in terms of when we provide our input. We had, as John Paul mentioned, and I think I mentioned too, we also talked to the developer, John Paul, in terms of what we would recommend for open space. And it's not that we didn't come up with some suggestions, it was our suggestions were not acceptable.
Right, but in terms of how I understand, when there's an interest in open space, that the procedure now, from what we had a little presentation from somebody from CUPOP on our housing committee who's also a member, and it was explained the way I understood it, that if there's a recommendation for open space, that first goes to CUPOP, and they do the analysis, and then if it makes sense, that would go to the Board of Selectmen.
So Christine is
Yeah.
our expert on this, and she explained to us, we would come up with a recommendation, provide our recommendation to the town planning and zoning, and you guys would decide whether you wanted to take our suggestion, take the developer's suggestion, not have any open space, or pick something entirely different. Our role is advisory, and this is what we advise, is those two lots in that thin strip of land.
There typically is not, CUPOP is not involved in this process of a subdivision. The developer comes in, offers open space, you get review comments from the Conservation Commission, and then you make a decision. It's not held up by it going to CUPOP or anything else. If in advance of this, there had been some meeting of the minds and they had decided that they wanted to give some land, then they could have approached the land trust or the town and said, who wants to take ownership of this land, or who wants to have the easement? But at this point, CUPOP is not a portion of this process. The process is that you have an application, it's required to either ask a waiver of open space or provide open space. You've seen what they've offered, they're here giving their presentation, and then you make a decision on this subdivision. And then after that is made, then CUPOP or whoever, if they need to involve themselves, will involve themselves after that.
So I have a related question. Is the Conservation Commission suggesting who should own this?
Well,
13 and 14 and/or?
so the subdivision regulations contemplate the town owning this property.
It's not
Which
the
is-
only option, though. It could be deeded to the Woodbridge Land Trust.
Yeah, definitely. And
That
it
could
hasn't
happen
Have
been-
you had
also.
any conversations with either the town or the land trust about receiving this property, which may be some of the things that Kathleen was getting at?
We thought that was a little premature, given how much it wasn't even being considered by the developer. I happen to have a husband who's on the land trust, and I get a sense that they're open to just about any land that is deemed to be kept in natural environment, but I can't speak for them for sure. But I don't think that would be a hard conversation to have with them if it became an option.
So the subdivision regulations require that the land be, there'd be topsoil on the land and there'd be grass and basically a field created by the open space. So I don't see that there would be much, if any, maintenance required by the town for it. But we frankly didn't have that discussion in terms of who would own the property, whether it would be the town or the land trust.
Aaron?
The proposal from the applicant, which I don't know if you've seen, that's the southeast corner along the river, is that in line with your recommendation of the maximum amount of land in the southeast corner, which does not include the retention basin?
So, yeah, our motion was to basically describe that very thin piece of land along the river, and as much of that as possible. It wasn't clear on the early drawings how far the retention basin and the overflow area was going to extend. We recognize the town doesn't want to own that property, and we understand why.
Yeah.
So it would be from where the developer's property ends for the retention basin and the overflow area to the edge of the river was basically, would provide a pathway
Yeah.
that might future be able to connect to other trails.
And then, do you know what percentage, the proposal that you're, in your letter that has lots 13 and 14 and this area approximately, do you know what percentage of the lot area that would be?
We don't have, I don't have that drawing in front of me to tell you what the square footage of
But
those two lots are.
I'm assuming that that's over the 10%, given that,
I'm not sure what the number adds up to off the top of my head, honestly.
It might not be over.
It might not be over 10%. Because honestly,
well, the blue space was described to us as approximately 10% of the lot area.
yeah, so the
And-
blue space includes land under the river, under the water.
But that's part of the lot. It's part of the property's own, they own that property, correct?
I guess that's something to ask Chris, who owns the
So lot
waterway.
13 is 17,478 square feet, and lot 14 is 15,759 square feet.
Can you repeat those numbers again? I'm sorry.
Certainly, it's on page C2 of your plans.
Yeah, I couldn't.
But it's 17,478 square feet for lot 13, and 15,759 square feet for lot 14.
So we were in a position where we had to make a recommendation of property that we thought was representative of the entire subdivision. And that's why we selected those lots, because they seemed to be less intrusive or disturb the developer's overall plans than picking anything else. So our other option would be to ask them to redesign the layout to provide a representative piece of land somewhere else on the development, but that wasn't an option.
And just for my edification, can you give me a reference to where this requirement that you have to have open space as representative of the rest of the development? Because I've seen plenty of things in here about trail systems and
Well,
connecting trail systems.
You read it earlier, you actually read it too earlier, one of the things you read out loud. I just have section 8, it doesn't say it in section 8, I think it's the prior section that might have that.
The other question is, what does representative mean? Is it representative in a wooded versus open lot? Is it representative in a buildable versus not buildable?
So our interpretation of that would be that it wasn't all wetlands that was being provided to us, it wasn't all land that was underwater, that it was representative kind of in the most simplest terms. From what we saw, as I mentioned, the Conservation Commission went down to the property and we thought that these two lots looked like the kind of the average typical lot, not the area that was wetlands and not the area that was necessarily under the water either.
Thank you.
But it seems like, if I'm doing the math correctly, lot 13 and 14, that's more than 10%. That's significantly more than 10%, right? I mean, like,
Yes,
right?
so our other option was to draw something out differently that was entirely different, describe it somehow in another way. The only way we had it was to be able to look at the drawings that were provided to the developer. We had requested that some of that land be available, and they said they weren't willing to consider losing any of the buildable area of the lot, so.
Would you mind responding to the statement that the characterization of the meeting and the motion that was passed by the Conservation Commission as conveyed by Mr. Garcia was that the purpose of choosing those two lots is to reduce the density? Is that correct?
Things we spoke about was the corridor of, between the river and along the Merritt and that piece of land and going up to West Rock. And it being, I mean, we had people who came and said they saw coyotes and they saw, various animals, and that they spoke about it as being a really important conduit for wildlife. So that was, for me, that was a big thing. And also that there is some wetlands right there, and that protects that wetlands. Yeah, I think that's.
So reducing the density wasn't our primary objective, that was just a side benefit. So our function was to look at what the Section 8 allowed us to consider, and I guess it was Section 7 before that. That's really the criteria that we used. We did talk about the traffic concerns, because when we went down there, the people in the neighborhood were very concerned about the traffic issues in there, and if there were one or two less houses developed there, that would marginally improve that. But that wasn't the criteria that we used to develop our recommendation at all.
But you did just say that this was discussed as a side benefit of reducing the number of lots and reducing the density. You did just say that.
That wasn't our primary
I
objective.
know it's not your primary, but it was something that you were discussing as part of your meeting.
I think somebody said that it would reduce the density, and people said that's probably not such a bad thing, because everybody complained about the parking. But to be clear, that's not what our recommendation was based on. Our recommendation was based on the criteria that's in section 7 and 8, period.
I think a profound thing, or something that we thought was very clear to, at least to me and maybe other people, is that the land that was being considered to be given was already land that would be protected under the, at least most of it protected under the wetlands restriction of a 50-foot or 100-foot review area. And so we were being offered what already would be offered under any circumstances. So that didn't seem like that was an offering in good faith, that they were really trying to give us land that would be held into perpetuity for land that would be protected, because that would already be protected.
But
So-
do lots 13 and 14 contain wetlands themselves? If I
No,
understand. Okay.
they don't.
Yeah, it looks like.
They-
They
They
do
connect,
not.
they connect to areas that do.
There are wetlands that are, adjacent to them that are on the state property. They're not part
No,
of
they're
this
not part of
particular.
it, but it's still giving it a buffer.
Could you repeat your last comment there, that the waterfront property is
Well, I
land that
think-
can't be developed?
well,
Could you explain that a little
let's
bit more?
talk
please?
to Chris, she's the real authority on this, if that's okay with you, Chris.
Chris is not giving testimony, though. in
So,
our-
Okay.
so
hearing.
part of the water, part of the land that was proposed to be given to the town is land rather that is underwater. And part of it is also the land that's right adjacent to, along the river, that could not be buildable because it's a upland review area. Actually, could be buildable, but they'd have to have permission to do it. So from a practical perspective, it's property that would never be developed anyway. So it's really giving, I don't know what the expression is, your sleeves off a short sleeve shirt, or whatever the expression is. It's not giving up anything at all.
Have you heard conflicting information here that the conservation team is telling us that some of that property is underwater, but did we hear that before, that property was not underwater?
No,
Part of it
Did I
is the
misunderstand?
waterway.
it includes part of the West River, which is part of the property that is owned
If,
by the developers.
if you look at the map that you were given,
Yeah.
the dark blue line is what
Is
they've
the prop-
talked about
yep.
giving you. There is a dashed blue line.
Yeah.
The dashed blue line, and
Is the
correct me
river?
if I'm wrong, is the water course.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is the
Yeah.
line you would,
Yeah, yeah.
this is the water course.
That's what you-
So the dashed blue
half of
line
it's-
is
half of
the
it's underwater.
actual
Yeah.
water course of the West River. And then upslope of that, you'll see another red dashed line, which has little indicators of triangles where it says WF and then a number. Those are what we call flag wetlands. So those are soils which are poorly drained under the state definition of wetlands. One of the things that's wetlands is poorly drained soils. So that's identifying outside of the actual river itself where there are poorly drained soils. And so that's that dashed red line that you see. And then anything between that dashed red line and that next heavy blue line as you go towards the overflow area and the detention area is what we call upland. So it's not wetland soils, it's upland. And in the town of Woodbridge, the Woodbridge Inland Wetlands Agency has designated anything within 100 feet of the edge of something that's designated as a wetland as being their upland review area. So they look at that area and then they determine what, if anything, someone can do in that area. So when you look at this map, you're gonna see that there's actually some work that's being done in here because they're gonna sculpt an overflow area and also that detention area. So there is work which is occurring in there, but once the work is done, it will function as those two functions. It will function as an overflow area, and it will also function as the detention pond itself.
Chris, maybe you don't know this answer. Is the detention space and the overflow area, is that all what is retained by the developer for future maintenance, or is it just that detention basin?
That's the area that would be maintained by the developer.
So just the blue,
It's my understanding.
just for clarification, just the blue line, the dark blue line is what's being proposed to be given to the town?
As far as Mr.
And-
Nuff, and that's the
Yeah.
correct thing, yes.
So,
And-
but we have these, it's
Yeah.
hard for us to
So,
ask questions
but
of those
I
folks
think
when we have
that
these folks in front of us.
Chris
I'm sorry. You could hold
clarified
on one
that really
second.
well, is that there's the water course.
Can you move the mic in front of you?
Oh, sorry. There's the water course, and then there's the upland review area, part of which is already gonna be maintained from that, and then there's even a part of the upland review area that is becoming part of the development because it's gonna be part of the backyards. So likely wetlands, and I can't speak for them obviously, wouldn't think that you could put units in that area under any circumstances. So that's why as a conservation commission, we've questioned, you didn't really restrict, I think we've already said it many times, but.
Sure. Just a question, in your Conservation Commission's discussions, did you talk about the possibility of including both the edge of the river for a trail and part of those overflow areas, detention basins, as a larger slice, recognizing that the Conservation Commission, the Wetlands Commission didn't want to maintain it? But
Right.
there could be legal structures that would still have the
Right, those would fit
maintenance
within the,
retained.
sorry,
There might be legal ways of structuring that to allow the developer to keep maintaining it and yet having that as public access open space.
right.
We didn't consider that because the overflow area and the detention basin were considered kind of off limits. That was something the developer was gonna keep. We didn't consider any other structure with regard to that.
But we considered the pathway right at the edge of it because there's public interest in that, and that would be something that is,
I mean, obviously, we don't want a pathway or a trail through a detention basin, so that wouldn't work.
No, understood. I'm more thinking about to the extent that there's part of the offer in, that you're concerned about, that's in the river, if there was the offer in the upland areas instead, that still achieved 10,000 feet. You didn't, square feet, you didn't discuss that as an option.
We did not, that wasn't an option because the town didn't want to own or have responsibility for the detention basin.
I understand town ownership, but I do understand there are other ways to approach that. Other questions for the Conservation Commission? Great, thank you so much.
thank you for your time.
Thank you.
So unless there are other members of the Conservation Commission, I'd really love to get to the public, if we could. Great, so members of the public, I'll go back to my original spiel because it's been a little while to remind you. Oh, if I can find it. Just give me a moment. I do invite members of the public to come up to the podium if you'd like to speak. I will time you for 3 minutes. I do apologize.
Sign in, he'll time you with his clock, and they won't answer any questions.
Yes, thank you, Chris. That's the shorthand version. A reminder, if you could, and I won't start the clock until you're signed in.
It's going to be very
and
brief.
introduced. Okay, but
Kelly
let me-
Parker, 35 Middle Avenue. I'm actually kind of surprised there's not more residents here, but I think they're quite discouraged. I will speak on my concerns. And I'll start with saying my family's lived there over 100 years, probably. The traffic, I heard the story of their study. And it totally, maybe it's accurate. Try to get out of Merritt Avenue at 7:30 in the morning, where the do not block box is covered with cars. we sit through that light 2 and 3 times, and someone can come and sit with us and see it, four cars back. So I disagree with that study. I would say someone come and try to get out of our road or get in our road at 5 o'clock, trying to go through by Lucy Street or having to go around and go all the way near Walgreens and back up to get into where we live. Secondly, I know nothing about building, obviously. It blows my mind that many of these buildings that they're gonna build are in a flood zone. Am I correct or incorrect? So they're just building them higher and it's in a flood zone. That river does flood, and there hasn't been an avest there in many years. That was in the ball field. So there is water there. There was water there. I'm not saying it floods like completely. When we had the flood and it took the bridge away, we used to have to walk up the highway to get to Stop and Shop. So I'm really concerned that, I'm not saying, I know they've done their due diligence. I've heard them. I just think 14 duplexes, 28 families on that little road coming out is absurd. I think also directly, I don't know if anyone's been down there to look at it, any of the new buildings that they put in, that they're literally 2 feet apart on Merritt Avenue where they built them, that someone could stick their hand out their window to them. And maybe when you do your regulations again, take into consideration the change in lifestyles. And I know many are very comfortable on their 1+ acres of land. We enjoy open space just as much as anyone else. And I feel it's like wherever you can build in our area, you'll build, which is great. I know we need the tax base, but whenever it starts going up Amity Road, there's like a halt from everybody. And I think if you're gonna look into, I'm listening to people laugh at some of the statements the Conservation Committee made. I thought was very unprofessional as well. But I would like to just say that I'm really upset over this development. I think it's gonna change the lifestyle of everybody that's lived there for 70 years plus years. Thank you. I hope something that I've said, someone will maybe go down there and look at some of these and see how they're directly in people's backyards and that you could put your arm out and reach some of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have other members of the public who'd like to make public comment tonight? While our next speaker is coming up, I will note for the record that, well, noted again later, that we will be continuing this hearing, so there'll be another opportunity for public comment at our next meeting. And there's always the opportunity to submit written comments as well that can be entered into our record.
Can I just ask a question? When is that meeting? Is that next
We haven't
month?
scheduled it yet.
Oh, so, okay.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Tim Austin. I just have a very brief comment. Mr. Garcia has identified that they are willing, they outlined 10% of open space, including the river, and they were willing to give more. And Chair Klee, in his very last comment before the public comment, explored one possibility for that, and I just suggest to the commission that they look at another possibility and asking for a little more open space along the river, but in the area that is nearest the Merritt Parkway and at the back, I call it, I guess, the side of Lot 8. I'm not sure of the orientation. I'm not privy to the maps you were given tonight, but from the boundaries of the open space that I have on the maps I was given a few months ago now, between that edge of that line, not in the river, but the other edge, and there's a tree line behind Lot 8 and Lot 7, wavy lines on my drawing, and that That space is a nicely wooded area that would be great to preserve and future use besides the off-mentioned connectivity with the rest of the West River Greenway, and it's a trail that's being attempted to be put through going down to Long Island Sound and up into Hamden, and where Woodbridge already has connectivity. Besides that use, that open space with a little more space there could be a nice area for the residents, that would be a possibility. There's fish now in the rivers because of the downstream dams being removed, and it would be a great location for a little micro park. You know, sometimes we think of open space as large tracts of land. They don't have to be. Open space can serve a great function for people who live in areas of density, such as this is, and will be even more when the development goes in. And they have a little micro park there where people can walk down and take their sons and daughters fishing, sit on a bench, look at the river, look at the ducks, which I've looked at the ducks there. They do go there. It could be very nice, and I'd ask you to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from the public? Seeing none. So Chris, we need a motion to continue this hearing to a date.
Your next regular meeting, I believe, is Monday, February 6th.
Okay, how does that work in terms of our timing for making decisions? Do we need?
You've just started this hearing this evening. You have 35 days to continue it without getting any extensions provided by the applicant, so that's within your purview to continue it to that date.
Does that sound reasonable to everyone?
Yes.
Okay, can I have a motion to?
Moved.
Second.
You guys are so efficient. Moved and seconded to continue this public hearing on the application of Litchfield Turnpike LLC for 10 and 14 Merritt Avenue for their 15-lot subdivision to our next regular meeting in February 6th?
6th.
At 6:30 p.m. Please note for members of the public, that'll be another opportunity. We will have public comment again during that session on February 6th. We welcome the public to also submit written questions to Chris Sullivan at Town Hall. Written questions or comments, those will all be part of the record for our deliberations. Chris, anything else on this matter?
You done good.
Good. Oh, yeah, sir,
Yeah,
shoot.
you should vote, yes.
Yeah, all in favor of.
Second motion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye. Do you want to take the rest of it, Jeff? Any opposed, any abstentions? Motion passes. Thanks.
Who's voting in place of Andrew?
Chadi, did you want it?
Okay.
Whatever. Yeah, I agree with the motion.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So our next item of business is new business from,
She's been patiently waiting.
oh my goodness, thank you.
And
Joyce,
can somebody send Andrew back in, please?
yeah.
Still, there it is.
There it is. Joyce, if you can make yourself comfortable, our next commission member will just join us in a moment. Hello, Joyce, if you could officially state your name for the record and introduce yourself to the commission.
Joyce Bellamy,
And where are you located?
100 Bradley Road.
And I believe you're coming in front of us to ask questions about storage facilities.
Yes.
Go right ahead.
I won't be long. I had called the town to ask a question concerning storage facilities. I have a property. It's in the Deb 2 zone. I have an office building there now. It's on a 1.09 acre, and it's a lot of land, you know, with just a small building on the land. And so I am an entrepreneur, and I was thinking about doing a storage facility. I called and asked about it, and it wasn't kind of clear, so she gave me the opportunity to kind of come to the meeting to ask the question about storage facility.
So you also had forwarded me some pictures,
Yes.
which I had sent to you after our last meeting, but before this one. So,
I had a survey done, and so I gave her the survey, and then I kind of gave her examples of, other storage facilities, what it, could look like. It would be something that I would be interested maybe in doing, maybe in about a year or so, not something like today or tomorrow, but I want to know so that I can kind of prepare for the future.
So we appreciate you coming before us. Chris, I will ask you, do we have anything currently in our use table on
it isn't
storage?
allowed use.
In
Part of-
development two?
In Dev 2. The question that I had, the type of storage units that Joyce was thinking of using was the storage
It's
containers.
self-storage.
With kind of a shielding of either fence or plantings and whatnot, so that it wouldn't necessarily be visible to the surrounding properties, but it would allow her an extra use on her property where there currently aren't any storage facilities at all in town.
There's two different types of ways I can do it with just the storage containers, or have someone come in and construct like a full storage facility. I did speak to a storage facility contractor, and it would be self-storage, like small individual storages. I don't really think that I've seen one out in Woodbridge. I also have friends who have businesses, and sometimes we need storage, and there's no storage in the area, and we have to go outside of the area. And so that's kind of what I thought about, that it would be a good idea maybe to do a small storage facility.
And Chris, I apologize, I'm not sure I have I know I have an image in my head, but I don't know if I have the images that you sent us.
So envision like a pod, one of those
Yeah.
white pots, only they would be, one possible way would be those side by side, and then with discrete screening around them.
Mhm.
Or a normal one-story, I assume,
Yeah,
storage, or it could be a two-story.
have you ever seen Cube Smart?
Yeah.
They're kind of all around, but they have like upstairs, downstairs, but I wouldn't do upstairs, downstairs. I would just do like the small little units, where you could put, really what I'm catering more to is maybe someone who owns a business that, has a lot of paperwork that need to store, because, we have to store documents up to 7 years. And so, we need a lot of space for that storage. I have a friend alone who has like 4 or 5 storages, and so, it's a much needed, thing. But there are containers that, like storage containers. I can get multiple storage containers, but I prefer to go with the full kind of storage, where there's multiple little storage. I feel like I'll get more out of the coverage area.
So Joyce, is this independent development or is this a franchisee development?
No, for me.
Just for you?
I own the property, and, I believe in generational wealth. And so I want to be able to create something that could be left for my children, and also something that could be an asset to the community.
And Chris, we don't have any currently in town?
If there are, they're very well hidden from me.
I looked and I didn't see any.
There aren't any.
Yeah.
There are some in Bethany, and obviously there are some in Orange and whatnot. but
And the process, because it's an allowed use under our
It
regulations?
would be a site plan submission to you, and whatnot, but.
And it would just need to make sure it fits on the parcel and,
Right, and then because these would be structures, we have to look at side yards and rear yards and all that good stuff. But rather than have her just start expending more money on this, I figured it would be good to get some kind of feedback from you.
Sounds like an interesting, good use, and, currently have a small office building on, and what are your neighbors, just curious?
There is a big tennis court,
Oh, you're right near Penn Central.
right next door. And then behind me, there's like I don't know if it's a warehouse or something like that. And
that
then there's across the street on Lunar, there's like some businesses across the street. But that's pretty much it.
I now know exactly where you are.
Yeah. There was an accountant there before, Levinsky, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
So Joyce, your question is anything in our regulations prevent you from putting in?
Yes, because I'm going to be investing a lot of money. I'm assuming it's probably going to cost about $500,000, and I've already saved up for half of that. And so within the next year, I want to continue to save, but I don't want to start a project and save for this project and then something changes. So I want to make sure, before starting the project that I kind of have all my ducks in a row. So I had the survey done. The surveyor is also an architectural engineer, and so he can kind of engineer the way that everything would go on the property. And then I also have a storage facility that would help him kind of oversee that so that I can get the best coverage of the land, with the storage facility. And so it won't be an eyesore. It'll, be something nice within the community. I'm investing a lot of dollars.
What's the size of the lot in total, Ms. Bell?
1.09.
Seems like it's an allowed use.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting use because I know of some, when you mentioned paper storage, that we have some people who have moved to town where they had brought documents that they had to retain from prior businesses, and the question was, where do we store it, and whatnot. So it definitely is something that people in town have been encountering the need for.
So we can't give you an advisory opinion now, but I think you're hopefully getting a sense of the commission from nods around the table. This sounds like an interesting use, allowed use, something that would only come in front of us for a site plan review.
So I'll just work with, an architect, as the time. It's going to be like a year or so, but I just wanted to start preparing for it, so.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, we appreciate you coming in
Any
tonight.
way I can help you, let me know.
Okay, all right.
And thank you for your patience for
I told her it would be a wait, and she was very patient.
Thank you so much.
Good luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
So,
nameplate?
That's your nameplate, yes. You want to pass that around to Andrew?
so back to our agenda. We can now move to our work session. Chris, we don't have anything to do on Litchfield Turnpike because
Nope,
it's
we've continued that.
continued. Did you want to talk about our commission operating budget for 2023-24?
So I have to turn in the budget for the commission by the end of the week. And as I've repeatedly told you, you've got a town plan coming up that you've got to get done by spring of 2025. I did talk to Tony Genovese, and he went back and looked at what the cost of the prior town plan was, where you had engaged the services of a planner to assist the commission, because it's obviously a big task. And that ran around $70,000. So his recommendation was that perhaps, because that was spanned out over several years, it was some work that was done that way, that perhaps we would put in 30,000 for this year and then 30,000 or whatever we might need for the following year, knowing that if you've engaged someone by the end of next year, or the next budget, which we're talking about 23-24, that then it could get carried forward. Any funds that you hadn't utilized could get carried forward to go from there. But I didn't want to let it go, and I didn't want it to be a decision that I made to put 30,000 in your budget.
We appreciate that at a number of levels. Quick question, that consultant is for us, but also for the Conservation Commission
No.
and or for?
No, this was solely There was an RFP put out for it, and then, people came and did presentations, and so the then chair of the, commission, and I think some commission members, as well as the first selectman came, in that process, and then they narrowed down to who, they wanted to use, but it was solely to produce your town plan.
The plan of conservation and
Plan of
development.
conservation
No,
and
that's what I was
development.
getting at. So are we, the lead commission, engaging this consultant, but is the consultant, is there any way to put some of this in the other budgets other than ours?
No,
No, it's just ours.
because the job of doing the town plan is solely within your purview.
Okay, so, but the Conservation Commission, the Inland Wetlands Commission, the Board of Selectmen will all participate in that process, or no?
No. It's your town plan.
Okay,
So
Just
you,
checking.
you have component pieces to it, like education and housing and recreation. So in the course of creating or updating that plan, you involve them for their feedback so that the plan can be representative of what that is. But the ultimate plan is your plan and your funds.
okay.
State requirement, right?
And
Yeah.
it's a
Oh,
state
yeah.
requirement, and it's the big tool,
Yeah.
it's planning ahead for the next 10 years.
It's a 10-year plan. Okay.
And there's mapping and all that other good stuff.
So $30,000 in this budget, do you need us to vote on that, or?
I can do it as a consensus, I just wanted it out there so that you're all aware of it, so if you watch those hearings on whatever,
Chris, you
You'll-
said the last one was $70,000?
it was about 70, yeah,
And when was that done?
in 2015.
2015.
Or it
So-
started
Is
before
30
2015.
is 30
So
enough?
my guess is you're gonna be paying more.
I don't know what we
But fine.
didn't know,
But finance is aware of it, so
but finance
But we're
is
doing
aware, and it's a
forward-looking
start,
planning.
because we know that you're not gonna spend all of it within the next fiscal year, but you will have at least started that process of selecting who it is, and then you would know how much more you might
and
need.
with finance being aware of it, there'll be an earmark, a line item earmark moving forward on each year over year.
Okay. So yes, I think consensus, go ahead with the 30,000.
Okay,
Thank
thank you
Chris.
very much.
And Rob, the town plan is for what TPZ wants to see the town accomplish? I've never gone through the plan yet, so.
Yeah, we haven't, has anyone, Paul, were you on it last time?
Yeah, I wasn't part of the process, but I read it. the previous-
Yeah,
It's
so
very
maybe,
comprehensive.
Chris, send around our existing town plan of conservation and.
It's posted on the
It's on,
website.
yeah, it's on our website.
I know, but send it around as a reminder for
I
all of
will
us
send
to
it
read
around as
it.
a reminder. So it's how the commission at the end of it breaks down or kind of assigns things that different boards, it's not all things that you're gonna do. So there may be things that other boards and commissions may do, and it's the goals, whether they're short-term or long-term and all that other kind of stuff. So, I would consider probably that housing would be, it's always been a component of it, but that's one of the components that you look at. But there's open space in there, and there's the schools in there. I mean, there's, it's the entire town and how the town will move forward.
It is a big task.
Sounds like,
And it's well beyond volunteer time in terms of formulating. You need somebody to help
You need a
get
professional,
it.
yeah. Okay, thank you. Our zoning regulations cleanup, I think, is still on our business, other than just to remind us to keep reading the
Well,
Chalder.
I'm assuming that you probably aren't ready to talk about it tonight, because it's
No.
getting late.
Yeah, we're not ready to talk about it tonight. I'm just using that as a reminder to.
Yeah, that's a reminder.
How are folks doing? I see at least.
great.
I had a lot of free time in December. It's the quietest month of the year, Mr. Chairman, so I was able to devote a lot of time to it.
Are you being
Are
sarcastic?
you-
Yes.
Yes, he is.
I thought you would.
Well, I'm not being sarcastic. I actually used my time to go through the reformatted regulations, and there's some, there's some, for me, because I was looking at housing, of course, there's some confusion between a couple parts and charts, and so there's work to be done, and he even highlights, different areas in red and in yellow highlights, so it's not like a done product. I think he's looking for us to discuss some of the discrepancies that he's found in the regulations.
Do we think that's something we'd be ready to do in February or no?
What else on the agenda for February?
Right now, you just have this hearing continuation.
I think it's hard to do all in one night. I mean, it's probably gonna be 2 or 3 sessions. It takes a long time
Yeah.
to go through it. I mean,
I
yeah,
mean,
you were around.
but-
with the
but-
intro, and I had
You go to sleep.
comments on the way.
So,
Is this with Chalder or no?
no, he's done.
He's all done.
He's done what he said he would do. He created this document. It's a document that I can edit for you based on what you determine you want it to do.
So is there a natural break to like take a first chunk of it that might be worth looking at in February?
I mean, even if you said, let's go through section 3, which is a big section, but section 4 is also a big section. So I mean, if you, 2 is short, it's definitions.
I mean, I think we keep kicking the can down the road. I think we have to dig into it at
It
some
needs to
point.
get done.
Okay, so let's have for the February agenda, we'll look at sections, what, 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah.
And if you can send out daily or an hourly reminder,
I can do that, you know. I can.
especially the fall.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
I had it passed. I didn't know how to read. Is there,
Okay,
like, books
Now
on
you tell
tape?
us.
Is there Chalder on tape?
No, there's no Chalder on tape.
I'll rely on
Did you
Justin
say
for it.
Charles
Okay. So that's our homework assignment,
Okay.
sections 1, 2, and 3 for next time. Aaron, we will make sure you have a copy of it.
I do have a question on the homework assignment, though. I mean, are we looking at whether or not the reformatting, was done correctly, or are we looking at seeing whether or not there's some definite changes that need to occur? Because there's like character all over the place in the zoning regs, and that has been, you're not supposed to use character anymore based on the new zoning enabling acts. And so,
That's the kind of stuff you're supposed to
yeah,
do.
and even about the purposes, there's a lot of information where they really had made stronger efforts for, affirmatively, affirming affordable housing, fair housing, and those, I think, need to be part of the purposes of the plan, and that's not really in there at all. So those are the type of recommendations we could be.
Knowing that you also had talked about having the housing committee come and talk about
Yes.
that block of stuff that the housing committee
Right,
would
but I'm talking
sug-
about stuff that we could decide as a commission, unless,
Right.
I don't think that necessarily needs to come from the housing committee. I think we have the zoning enabling act that has made some major changes in the way we present our zoning, so I think that should be incorporated. The commission should be doing that type of work.
So it's up to you.
So those are all things that, yes, we can raise and discuss whether those are things we would want to fix on our own or invite someone to come to us and say from the Housing Commission. So read it with an eye for that. Does it not only work in terms of, yes, it is now a functional document that is reformatted and the arrows point in the right direction and the numbers all make sense and there are no missing tables and no, there's the line edit stuff, but there's also, okay, this is now going to replace this thing that I lug around with me. Is this the thing that we want it to be? Does it have all the elements we think that are necessary in it? And
I mean, from a staff perspective, I want to get these things cleaned up so people can read them and find everything in them that they're supposed to be. And then immediately you can dive into the meatier stuff that you want to get into, but I don't want to keep holding this up. I mean, we're coming up on a year now, almost, since we engaged Chalder to start doing this. And here we sit, and we still haven't.
Can I just bring up one area of confusion I had, so as you're going through this in terms of the housing, was you have like the affordable housing section, which talks about the affordable housing district, and that's kind of confusing in terms of how that plays into the opportunity housing 3.4. I'm wondering if that section's even needed anymore. It just doesn't. It's kind of conflicting. They have different the bulk regulations are conflicting. Even the affordable housing definitions are different. So those two areas,
That, the affordable housing section that's in there is an old section.
Right.
Probably dating back to when 830G first started.
Right, so I'm
back
just
in the
wondering
early
if
80s.
it's needed.
So, if it's not appropriate to have it anymore because you've changed what your capabilities are in terms of housing opportunities that there are in town, maybe it disappears now.
So are you going through this like in track changes, like are you making edits that way or something comparable to that?
I haven't been track changing, I just been doing a little sticky notes. But I don't know if it's even, I guess I could do track changes in some parts.
It's a Word document, and that's the way he gave it to us, so
Yeah.
that you can do it that way.
Yeah, but there's some areas where he's clearly just questioning this, and the affordable housing part was something he just highlighted. So,
The purpose of retaining him originally was not to change policy.
Right, it was to
It was
comment.
just to clean up and make it more readable, accessible, and so forth. And I wouldn't object to policy changes, but that should probably be done separately by the commission. This was supposed to be, an exercise to clean it up. If on page 12, for example, it says there's a table on page 15 and there's not, that needs to be fixed. So
Yeah.
this was something that I thought was a little bit of a quicker kind of thing where we were just cleaning it
But
up.
didn't he do that?
He did, and then he has comments, and we're just supposed to say if we agree with them or not, or to make changes. Do we need a public hearing to finalize this change?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
So we would have a public hearing afterwards to do that. But the original intention, which we can change, was never to be a comprehensive policy readjustment, but to do something where we were sort of, taking a paper and making it better, or a book editing, if you would.
yeah, and I understand that, but when you go through it, you realize, there's a lot of changes that need to be made just to bring it up to date. So I think if we're gonna go through this, that we should start making the necessary changes.
Then the whole process is really elongated. I mean, then it's a different process. It's not gonna be a one meeting and maybe two meeting thing. And then it involves a lot more discussion than just making changes to a table that doesn't exist or.
But that's okay, right?
Yeah, but if we're gonna have a public hearing and you're gonna be presenting something that's not ready for prime time, then you're gonna bring out people that are gonna be questioning what's going on. So I think it's better just to do it. Right.
We have things facing the town that I think need attention sooner rather than later.
No, the
Coming out
problem that
TBD.
you've got is that the regulations that you have are flawed. And they're flawed in a very simple way, that there's stuff that's missing. And that's what Glenn was going through and doing.
I'm
And
not
to me,
disagreeing.
as a staff person who's trying to work with people who are just coming into my office, I need that stuff cleaned up yesterday.
Do you need a public hearing to make those corrections?
Yes, because when we did it, when we had, Mary Ann Dubuque said very clearly that correcting the spelling of a word was a Scrivener's thing. But changing, adding tables, that kind of stuff is not a Scrivener's error.
Right.
And so that needs a public hearing, it needs to go to the, Regional Planning Commission, so it gets to come to you guys again and whatnot. But, I mean, there's the quick stuff that we need to get done, and then there's the more substantive stuff. And I would just please beg you, get the stupid quick stuff done. Because we've put it off for almost a year now. This is ridiculous.
If we put the small stuff off a year, what are we gonna do with the big stuff?
Well, I just find it hard, the quick stuff just kind of leads to like, not quick stuff, and like, for instance, the affordable housing district, regulations didn't make much sense to me, in consideration of the new zoning regulations that have been passed. It just, to me, it's just kind of, I don't know, it's obsolete, but it just needs to be reworked because, just, calling it an affordable housing district in itself, I think is problematic,
And it may be that you just need to delete that whole section and reconfigure or whatever.
Is that a quick fix?
It's up to you. I mean,
Well, why don't
the
we start
problem
with the
is we
first
have-
three
We need to do
sections
the first
next
three
month
sections.
and do that?
We've been
They're
pushing
still
this
a-
off for month after month
I
after
know.
month, and
could
we're
leave
not
the
getting
lawsuits
anywhere.
The problem is I did my homework.
I think
Well,
Aaron should be
you're one out of
responsible as
whatever.
the UB sergeant.
So I think we look at those first three sections.
Yes.
there will probably pretty quickly, things will fall into the quick fix side and a not quick fix side, but maybe there's a few things in the middle that are, okay, this just doesn't make any sense anymore. While we're having a public hearing, let's just erase this thing that is anachronistic, it's old, or it doesn't make any sense. And if that's opportunity to do that in a expedited way, let's take advantage of that. And there may be some things that may require, no, we really want to have a presentation on this specific topic to us to change that, right? But Chris, we've all been admonished by the teacher for failing to do our homework.
You've all been admonished, I'm
So
sorry.
we shall do our homework. Sections 1 through 3 for February.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you.
Anything on cannabis?
I guess you can start buying it.
Next
It's
Tuesday.
pretty soon.
And no applications, no one wants to build anything here.
People have talked about it, but nobody's,
Nobody's
you know, I just tell them, at this stage of the game, I have to consider it as a retail use.
Okay.
If they come in with a storage store.
What's the deadline for that? Isn't it like we have to do something or else a certain date
No.
will be considered retail?
It already.
If we don't do something, we use it as a regular retail use.
Okay,
But that's already passed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
we can now just regulate it if we
Okay.
want to.
so.
But we don't seem to want to right now. Anything from Scrog?
Yeah, there was a meeting on the 8th of December. There was the Merritt Avenue application, and I recused myself there as I did here, so I have nothing to speak about there. There was a City of Milford proposed zoning amendment with respect to accessory apartments. A Town of Madison proposed text amendment extending their moratorium on retail cannabis establishments. So they not only had a moratorium, but they renewed it. As did the Town of Cheshire, proposed the same sort of amendment to extend their moratorium. In each case for an additional 6 months, I believe. And then lastly, Town of Prospect, we're just redesignating certain residential zones. And that was it. And that's a goal by the Rangers.
Kathy, anything from the Housing Committee?
Yeah, I just want to bring up a couple things. Our last meeting was in December 7th. And so we met with Ben Fink, who the SCROG has hired to do community conversations around housing. And the idea is to kind of, our first goal is to create do a power mapping session where we get people together of different interests and try to, map where leaders and organizations are that can really carry the message or carry the conversation of affordable housing. We're just trying to get people to understand and break down any type of myths, people have or adversity to having housing in Woodbridge. So we are having this power mapping session that's going to be on Tuesday. It's a special meeting, Tuesday, January 17th. So we are extending invites to different committees. We extended an invite to DEI and the Task Force 2030, and I'd like to extend an invite to anybody on this commission if they're interested in engaging in a power mapping exercise with Ben Fink to talk about housing. It's just really identifying different groups. Just let me know, and I'll send you the information. Some of the exercises that we were going through, and it's kind of why I brought up the issue of town-owned property. We talked about CUPOP is creating a list of town-owned properties and it's gonna be a comprehensive list where they're gonna be showing like, there's restrictions on town-owned properties and whether or not, in deeds, and be able to link everything in so we can start identifying potential sites for housing. Though, my understanding, and that if any town-owned property was being, considered, that was something that had to go through CUPOP. Despite being a subdivision, that ultimately, the Conservation Committee would have to go to CUPOP and discuss that. And this is where I'm getting confused because, I worked for the city of Bridgeport for 25 years. I also did lots of POCDs. But that being said, we dealt with town-owned properties, and the town was always wanting to understand what properties were coming in because there's liability, the responsibility, you're taking property off of tax rolls. So ultimately, it was always the town that had to be the last say as to whether they wanted to take in a piece of property. And so that this is what I'm not getting that or understanding, and then if that's the way it is, and that's the way it is, whether or not a committee can independently come in and say, we want this property, and the town doesn't have any say in it. And that's why I always felt there needed to be, that there has to be a vetting process. And so the way it was explained to me was that there is a vetting process, there always was a vetting process, and that these properties need, if the Conservation Committee is identifying property, that they need to bring that to consideration, needs to bring it to CUPOP, and they discuss it there, and the CUPOP does the analysis to see whether or not that shakes out and makes sense, and brings it to the town and makes sure that makes sense, and that's the process. So I don't know what I'm getting wrong, but I think there's clarification that needs to be had here in terms of when town-owned property comes in, who has the ultimate say for this.
That was emphasized tonight when we were talking about Merritt Ave and the regulations. The discussion kind of led to TPZ can determine on their own what sections of property we want for town-owned land, regardless of what anybody else says. I don't think that's correct. It shouldn't be part of our responsibility, and it should have, agreement with other parts of the town that say yes or no, we want some of this land. You can't have a blanket 10% requirement for every subdivision or whatever plan is coming through this door. We'd have what the gentleman talked about before. We'd have pockets of land throughout the entire town that are useless that we gotta maintain.
Unfortunately, the statutes give your commission, as a planning commission, the ability to create subdivisions or approve them.
Or
And as
not do anything.
And as part of that process, there's an open space provision. And as part of that process, there's a time clock that's ticking. So if a subdivider chooses to go in advance before they come here and iron all that stuff out, but once it hits here, you've got a clock that's ticking, and you have to act, and you can't wait for other independent things which are not recognized by statute. Whether they're out there in your charter, I can ask town council. But in every other town that I've worked in, it's this commission in its planning function approving a subdivision and either waiving open space or accepting open space, or some towns, which we don't do, accepting fees in lieu of open space, which then gives the town the ability to collect funds, which it can then use towards surveying property that it might want to purchase, or purchasing property, or whatever it may want to do.
So that's one of the bigger.
But what I see in this town quite often is that there's so many boards and commissions which have so much overlap, which isn't typically there in most cities and towns, that we stumble over stuff like this.
Right, but sometimes I see there could be like conflicting agendas, this Conservation Committee is conserving property for the purpose of stifling development, then that's a problem. I have a problem with that. I'm saying, for instance, that could happen. So
That is not their charge. They have a statutory
Yeah,
charge,
but-
and that is not included in their
I know
statutory
it's not the
charge.
charge.
Charge and action are two different things.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
But then you have the ability
Yeah.
as your own board to weigh that which you hear.
which we can do. The narrow question that I don't understand is that we could even decide that we want the town to own it, we want it to be an easement, all those sorts of things, without consulting the town attorney to make
Right.
sure that any of that is
That
what
makes
they
no
want.
sense,
Seems a little odd.
More often than not, what I've seen happen is that you'll accept it and then they have to come up, now knowing that you want whatever it may be,
They have to come up
that
with
they
it.
have to then find the entity that wishes to accept the responsibility for it. Whether it's the land trust or whether it's the town itself or whatever it may be. And that's not your job to finalize that. But then they have a clock ticking too, because that record subdivision map has to get filed within 90 days. And that has to show that which you've approved. And that, at the time that that's filed, that transfer of land to whomever it's going has to occur. So at the time of the filing, if there's land getting given or an easement getting given, all that gets filed at the same time.
I mean, I just think ultimately, if we're taking land, it's gotta be for the, the best benefit of the town. And I just think there needs to be a better vetting process for that, because
Though we are the
You're
planning
right.
agency of the town, so we do have that ability to make those decisions. That's what we've been charged with. I don't think we're gonna solve all of this tonight, and it's late, and
You probably haven't eaten dinner yet.
I have not eaten dinner yet. Paul?
I have one question. Tonight was the first time I heard someone say you can't use something as a basis for your decision. Is there for the attorneys in the room, or Chris, is there any kind of material which says what you can and can't base decisions on?
No.
So I asked them to provide that to us, and they have to provide it in each hearing before us. Let's come up with a hearing that you may have missed on a different application. So, yeah, and Andrew's here, so we can't actually talk more about the details. So,
Yeah, and again, this just brought up, but I just wonder, are there other reasons? Do you know of any reason that you cannot base a decision on? I guess, and if there are.
education, I heard that
Like,
one.
what's that?
You can't like use the fact that there's gonna be increase in
There's
education.
no crib sheet that's out there.
That's what I was looking for.
Which
Thank
is
you.
why, when I get those annual letters from, or the quarterly letters from the Federation of Connecticut Planning and Zoning, whatever they are, that's one of the few places where Steve Byrne, who puts that out, actually looks at what's happening up in the legislature, is looking at court cases, he summarizes it, and he puts it there. It's the only place I've really ever seen it done and sent out. So when I send that out to you, take a minute and read it, because it's really the only place that I've ever seen that done. There's no document. For instance, with wetlands, they're really good, because the state deep in that wetland division, even though they're way understaffed, they have a history of all of the court cases that impact wetlands. So you can look at it and it's there. But for planning and zoning commissions, I don't know of anything that's out there.
Kathy just said you can't base a decision on education, right?
Right, increase in education.
I didn't know that. And I wouldn't know where you even were in any orientation or any documents I've ever seen. I don't think it's ever said that.
I mean, I saw that in a presentation that Tim Hollister did for SCROG.
That's the kind of thing the applicant's attorney will point out. In my experience, they often will tell you.
Right, but then Rob said,
No, they have to
and also,
back up
but you
based
feel
on-
ignorant or like an idiot if someone's coming to you and saying to you, well, you should know this because you're on planning and zoning. I don't know if he's right or wrong or anybody else is right or wrong, but it's something I'd like to know about.
we should cut ourselves a break, because this is now our third subdivision application after having no subdivision
Division
applications.
applications for the entire time that you guys have been here,
Right.
pretty much.
So,
But that's gonna, I think that's gonna be going up.
No,
That's
there's
what
not
we-
much land left.
Well,
we have any steep
There's a
burn,
lot of-
steep burn, summaries coming? I like those. Those, the summaries you talked about that are property law?
Yeah, we should be seeing one coming up pretty soon, so I'll send it out.
Because you're running legal life.
Chris, other,
You would respect that.
anything, I'm sorry, Kathy, was there anything else?
Well, there's just a-
There's nothing zoning wise that I have to tell you, except that, as I've mentioned to you before, the accessory dwelling unit thing is something that quietly is being used. It's not being used extensively, but at least once a month, we're seeing somebody come in with that. And that's,
Great.
you know, I wanna let you know that that's working. It's quietly there and it's working.
I just had one more thing to mention, and that the Housing Committee is also, we also participate in the SCROG Regional Housing Task Force Committee, and they do forums every month, and, you know, anybody here is invited to partake in these forums. And they have feature topics, and this month's is, we're gonna find it interesting. It's the nitty-gritty details of wastewater management in new developments. You know, I just wanna let folks know, if you're interested, you could sign up on the SCROG website, or I could send you the link, or Chris could send you the link.
I get the same thing that
Yeah.
Kathy does, so I can send it out to you, and all you have to do is, if you're interested, and you get sent the link, and it logs into your Outlook, and then I forget to look at it, and I'm busy doing something else. and
Yeah,
don't
but I
change.
think this, you know, it's definitely of interest for our area.
Okay, anything else? Any minutes? I didn't see any.
No,
That's fine.
no.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Any discussion? Aye.
Who seconded?
I second.
Oh, okay.
I almost never do, but today.